Oh, well, I'm very much a New York boy. I was born in Harlem Hospital and grew up in Harlem on 132nd Street and 7th Avenue. My father was an undertaker in the neighborhood, and we had his funeral parlor was on the ground floor, and then I lived on the second, and we lived on the second and third floor of this little private house, which was rather unusual for Harlem even in those days. Right next to us was an incredibly crowded apartment house on either side, and we lived one block away from what I believe in 1955 was the most crowded block in New York City. There were something like 10,000 people living on one single city block, which basically means that it was probably one of the most crowded places in the United States. My father was an undertaker, and he had a funeral parlor in Harlem, and my life was filled with corpses. It was so filled with corpses, they were like ordinary things to me. I never thought they were out of the ordinary. Sometimes I would joke with the kids that I played with, my friends on the block, and I would bring them into the funeral parlor, and I'd say there's a dead body back there, and then they'd all turn around and go, "Ooh," and turn around and run out. But I just thought it was funny. I think another factor in the way I sort of just fitted in with my community has to do with the fact that certainly in the 40s when I was growing up, there was a general racial pride in the entire community that was sort of focused on people who were particularly bright, people who were doing particularly well, people who were picked out as smart. I had lots of friends on the block, Rusty and Scrubby, where their father was a taxi driver, their mother was a nurse. And I was known as this kind of bright, kooky kid, but everybody kind of thought it was good that I was bright and kooky. I'm going to read from a book now that is one of my favorites. It's a book called Bread and Wine, and it's a comic book. You can see, in the same way you can tell whether something's experimental by seeing if the print looks funny on the page, you can see if it's a comic book because it's got pictures. There, okay. Maybe some of you remember many, many years ago, those of you who are my age, or possibly even if there are a few people who may even be older, but there used to be a wonderful show on Sunday morning called Pop the Comic Weekly, where somebody would read you from the comics, of the Sunday comics, and describe the pictures, and it was marvelous. Well, I'm not going to do that. There's a little kind of roundtable discussion, thank you very much, a little roundtable discussion in the end of the book that sort of is, all the people who contributed to the book, the artist Mia Wolf, who's sitting out there, and Dennis, who is one of the people that the book is about, and my daughter, and some of the people who are characters in the story, we all get together and we talk about the making of the book and the process. And I'm going to read you a little bit of that, and that's kind of text heavy. So there you go. The story of the book is essentially how Dennis, my life partner, and I got together about 10 years ago. And one of the things that was kind of interesting about this strange and wonderful relationship that's endured now for a decade is that Dennis was homeless when we first met. The first person to talk in this is the artist Mia. At one point, I showed Bread and Wine without the pictures to my then editor at Farrar, Straus and Giroux. He said he didn't understand the point of making it into a comic. Much later to Chip, I explained it was like making a movie of a Henry James novel, putting in what the text left out, either because words couldn't do it or because the tenor of the writing precluded it. At which point, I butt in and say, I'm awfully impressed with the way you've captured the feel and the look of those experiences from 7 years ago. I put the text together largely from letters and journals I wrote at the time, supplemented with questions to Dennis, Iva, my daughter, and John. Early in the project, Dennis took Mia and me on a walking tour of the route he used to follow every day with his shopping cart from Madison Avenue across Central Park to West 72nd Street. Mia took pictures of all of us, and at one point sent me up to Amherst with her camera to do a photo essay on the town. And then Mia says, what you're good at is vacuuming up the world and making it into sentences and stories. You're very cool in your method. What I'm good at is making wonderful messes. My artistic temperament is hot. Chip likes science. I like surreal cosmic shit. Like page 5, the Bone Marzo sculptures in Central Park. Chip likes accuracy and specifics. I'm a sucker for metaphor. Check out the penguins and flying bicycle. Chip never comes out and says, Dennis is sexy, Dennis is mysterious, I'm gonzo for the guy. But when Chip and Dennis are together, Chip gets goo-goo eyes, Dennis says really hilarious, risque things, and it's really sweet. It's the most incredible Valentine. Then me again. What incident stays from me that never made it into the story? It probably falls between page 35 and 36. We'd already decided to go up to Amherst together, but Dennis hadn't come over to the apartment yet, probably because my then 16-year-old daughter, Iva, was there that weekend, and I thought it would be simpler if Dennis wasn't there while she was. That night, Iva, John, and I decided to go down to 72nd Street for sushi. As we walked up, Dennis, still in his foul jumpsuit and knitted cap, was sitting on the steps next to the restaurant. And then Dennis says, the guy who owned the sushi place was a nice guy. On cold nights, sometimes he'd come out and give me a cup of that hot sake. That could make you feel real warm for a while. Then me. Surprised, I stopped and said, hello, you knew John already. I introduced you to Iva. Sitting there, you looked very glad to see us. We went into the restaurant and ate. All evening, however, I felt badly about it. You should have been inside with us, eating, not on the sidewalk, sitting. When we finished and came out, you were gone. The next night I got you, and the following morning we bussed up to Amherst the way Mia shows. A few weeks later, though, I asked you about it. You said it hadn't bothered you. It just was nice to see us. A year later, I asked you again. You didn't even remember it that well. But I did. It still bothers me. Says Dennis. Well, you're the one who should have been bothered, not me. I wasn't. No, it's true. I don't recall it that well anymore. I don't remember meeting Iva till later, the night a couple of weeks after we were back in the city and we all went out with her friend Eve. Now, you want me to say what pictures don't seem exactly right to me? Well, let me see. For one thing, the picture on page 4, the traffic on 72nd Street runs in the other direction. And if I ever packed my cart that messily, I never would have been able to find anything in it. You got to get everything into a shopping cart, man. You have to put it in there this way, that way, all in order. You can't just throw things in. But most people wouldn't notice that, I guess, unless they'd been on the streets too. Then the picture on page 20, man, you ain't never wasted that much in your life. I got that t-shirt last year. It says, mean people suck, nice people swallow. Well, you're one of the nice people, but I guess that's what you call poetic license. Then Mia says, when I got to the scene in the Skyline Motel, I showed up at Dennis's and Chip's apartment and said, take your clothes off. People usually look more themselves, and thus better, naked, and certainly more vulnerable. There goes the coolness. And while Chip says, then we held each other for a couple of days, I felt that it should be graphic and romantic in detail. The reason I spilled so much precious fluids was that all along I had this vision of a blowjob in silhouette, a rendering of positive and negative space with the cum as a white crystalline entity. So I fudged reality a bit for art, for sloppy love.